The Lighthouse and the Lavender. Chapter 1. An Invasion of Purple. For Finn, the island of Aeridor was a symphony composed in silence. Its movements were the crash of waves against black rock, the lonely cry of a gannet diving for fish, and the low moan of wind through the weathered stones of the lighthouse he called home. He had chosen this place, a jagged speck of land off the coast, for its profound and beautiful emptiness. As an ornithologist, studying the nesting habits of the Atlantic puffin, silence wasn't just a preference, it was a professional necessity. His morning routine was sacred. Dawn, a cup of bitter black coffee, and his binoculars. He would sit on the narrow iron balcony of the lighthouse 100 feet above the sea and watch the world wake up. He could identify birds by their silhouettes alone, their calls as familiar to him as old songs. This was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude. The invasion began with a noise he couldn't identify. It wasn't a bird, it wasn't the sea. It was a rhythmic, off-key humming carried on the breeze from the direction of the old keeper's cottage, a stone building nestled 100 yards away that had been vacant for years. Finn lowered his binoculars, a deep frown creasing his brow. He focused on the cottage. A brightly colored, ridiculously cheerful-looking boat was moored at the tiny, dilapidated dock. Boxes, dozens of them, were being unloaded by a small figure in vibrant yellow overalls. The humming was coming from her. He watched, his jaw tightening, as she dropped a box with a loud clatter, followed by an equally loud oopsie-daisy that seemed to violate the very air he breathed. Then came the smell, faint at first, then stronger. Not salt or sea, or bird guano. It was sweet, floral, and utterly alien. Lavender. His piece was officially over. He spent the rest of the day trying to ignore the disturbance, focusing on his research notes with a ferocity that bordered on rage. But the sounds were constant. The screech of a box being dragged, the tinny sound of music from a small portable speaker, and a laugh that was too bright for this gray, solemn island. By late afternoon, unable to concentrate, he knew he had to confront the intruder. He strode down the winding path from the lighthouse, his boots crunching on the gravel with grim purpose. As he got closer, he saw that the cottage's faded blue door was wide open. The woman was inside, her back to him, wrestling with a large stainless steel piece of equipment. "Excuse me," he said. His voice, unused for days, came out as a rusty bark. She jumped, spinning around with a gasp. She was younger than he'd thought, with a constellation of freckles across her nose and dark hair tied up in a messy, chaotic bun from which several strands had escaped. Her eyes were wide and the color of warm honey. "Oh my goodness, you scared me," she said, breaking into a disarmingly sunny smile. "I must be your neighbor, the bird watcher. I'm Luna. It's so wonderful to finally meet you." She wiped a dusty hand on her overalls and thrust it toward him. He stared at her hand until she awkwardly let it drop. "This is a private research area," he stated flatly. "The lease agreement specifies minimal disturbance." Luna's smile faltered, but only for a second. "Right, yes, of course. I'll try to be as quiet as a mouse with a commercial-grade oven." She gestured behind her to the equipment. "I'm setting up a small summer pop-up, a little kitchen, just a few tables outside. The tourists who take the ferry out for day trips will love it." Finn felt a cold dread wash over him. Tourists, tables, a kitchen. "No," he said, the word a stone dropping into a well. "Absolutely not. This is a protected nesting site. You can't have a commercial enterprise here." "Oh, no, it's all cleared," she said cheerfully, waving a piece of paper. "The council loved my proposal. A charming, rustic culinary experience. See? It's called the Lighthouse and the Lavender." She beamed at him as if sharing a wonderful secret. She had named her noisy, fragrant, tourist-attracting nightmare after his lighthouse. The audacity of it stole his breath. "I will be lodging a formal complaint," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Oh," she said, her smile finally vanishing, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "Well, I do hope we can work things out. I brought you something as a peace offering." She rummaged in a box and pulled out a small, lumpy scone wrapped in wax paper. "It's a lavender and white chocolate scone, my signature." He looked from the scone to her hopeful, honey-colored eyes. He could not imagine anything he wanted to put in his mouth less. "I don't like lavender, and I don't like scones." He walked back to his lighthouse, the scent of her cloying flowers seeming to follow him. From the safety of his high balcony, he trained his binoculars on her cottage again. She was unpacking a wooden sign, beautifully hand-painted. It read, "The Lighthouse and the Lavender. Grand opening Saturday." Finn lowered his binoculars and stared out to the cold, empty sea.
Chapter 2. The Storm, Inside and Out. Saturday arrived like a declaration of war. Finn awoke not to the cries of seabirds, but to the distant, cheerful chugging of the first tourist ferry of the day. From his perch, he watched it disgorge a small crowd of people onto the dock near the cottage. They were loud, colorful, and carried cameras. They were a plague of locusts in brightly colored windbreakers. He spent the morning trying to work, his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. The scent of grilled food and, of course, lavender wafted up to him, a chemical weapon designed to destroy his concentration. Laughter and exclamations drifted on the wind, sharp and intrusive. He saw one man, trying to get a picture of a puffin, venture dangerously close to a nesting burrow on the cliff edge. Finn had to yell himself hoarse from the balcony to get him to back away, earning himself a hostile glare. The final straw came around noon. He had been tracking a pair of rare Arctic terns, watching their delicate, intricate courtship flight. They were skittish birds, and their presence on Aeridor was a significant finding. Just as he was documenting their behavior, a shriek of delight erupted from below, a child chasing a kite near the cliffs. The terns, startled, broke their pattern and shot out over the sea, gone. Rage, cold and cure washed over Finn. That was it. He stormed out of the lighthouse, not even bothering to grab a coat, despite the darkening sky and the rising wind. The weather forecast had predicted a summer squall, but he was too furious to care. Luna's pop-up was in full swing. Small wooden tables were dotted around the cottage, occupied by smiling tourists sipping from glasses adorned with lavender sprigs. Luna herself was a whirlwind of energy, delivering plates of food with that same infuriatingly bright smile. She didn't see him coming. "You," he said, his voice low and shaking with anger. He stopped directly in front of her, ignoring the startled looks from her customers. Luna's smile faltered. "Finn, is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right," he bit out, keeping his voice down with immense effort. "Your little party just cost me a month's worth of data. You scared off a breeding pair of terns. Do you have any idea how rare that sighting is?" Her face paled. I'm so sorry. I told everyone to be careful of the birds." "Be careful?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You brought a circus to a nature reserve. Did you really think a few polite instructions would contain the chaos? This isn't some city park. This is a delicate, vital ecosystem, and you've treated it like your personal backyard party. Hurt flickered in her honey-colored eyes, quickly replaced by a defensive fire. I have put every last penny I have into this, into my dream. I have followed every rule. I have a right to be here just like you. This island doesn't belong to you, Finn. It's not your private kingdom. It was peaceful before you came. Peaceful or just empty? Maybe you're just afraid of a little bit of life intruding on your perfect, lonely world. Her words hit closer to home than he would ever admit. Before he could formulate a response, a powerful gust of wind ripped through the area, sending napkins flying and rattling the sign for the Lighthouse and the Lavender. The sky had turned a bruised, ominous purple-gray. The captain of the ferry appeared at the edge of the path, shouting over the wind. "Storm's coming in faster than they said! Everyone back to the boat, now! Last trip, or we'll be stuck here for the night." A frantic scramble ensued as the tourists gathered their belongings and hurried toward the dock. Within 10 minutes, they were gone. The ferry's horn blared a final, mournful note as it pulled away into the churning slate-gray water. And then the heavens opened. Rain began to fall, not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets. Finn and Luna were left standing alone amidst the abandoned tables, the world dissolving into a roaring chaos of wind and water. "Get inside!" he yelled at her over the storm's howl. She didn't need telling twice. They both dashed into the cottage just as the full force of the gale hit the island. The door slammed shut behind them, plunging them into a sudden intimate silence, broken only by the storm raging outside. They stood dripping on opposite sides of the small room, the anger between them still crackling in the air, thick and unresolved. A particularly violent gust of wind hit the cottage, and the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, leaving them in near darkness. Outside, something large scraped against the stone wall with a horrifying screech. They were trapped, together, and the storm, both inside and out, had only just begun.
Chapter 3. The Candlelight Truce. The darkness in the cottage was absolute, a thick, velvety blackness that swallowed sound. For a long moment, the only thing that existed was the howl of the wind and the frantic drumming of rain on the roof. The air between Finn and Luna was charged, heavy with the residue of their argument. "Stay there," Luna's voice came out of the dark, surprisingly steady. "I have candles, in the drawer by the sink." He heard her fumbling, the scrape of a drawer opening, the rustle of a matchbox, a tiny flame sparked to life, trembling in the gloom. She lit a thick pillar candle on the small wooden table, and the room was instantly transformed. The soft, flickering light pushed back the shadows, creating a small, warm bubble of civilization against the raging wilderness outside. In the candlelight, he could see the defiant set of her jaw had softened into weariness. She looked less like an invader and more like someone very far from home. The screeching sound came again, louder this time, followed by a sickening crunch of metal. "What was that?" Luna asked, her eyes wide. Finn's stomach lurched. He knew that sound. "My generator," he said, already moving toward the door. "The one that powers the lighthouse equipment. If the housing is breached, my data servers will be flooded." "You can't go out there," she cried, stepping in front of the door. "It's a hurricane. You'll be blown off the cliff." "It's my work," he said, his voice grim. "I have to."
"Then I'm coming with you," she stated, grabbing a heavy oilskin coat from a hook. It was far too big for her. "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed. "You'll be a liability." "And you'll be a dead man if you go alone," she shot back, her eyes flashing with a fire he was beginning to recognize. "I have rope in the shed. We can tie ourselves to the cottage railing. You won't fix anything if you're at the bottom of the sea. Stop being a stubborn fool and let me help you." He stared at her, momentarily stunned by her practicality. She was right. It was a foolish risk to take alone. Swallowing his pride, which tasted as bitter as his morning coffee, he gave a curt nod. The next 10 minutes were a brutal battle against the elements. Lashed together by a thick rope, they fought their way to the small utility shed where the generator was housed. The wind was a physical wall, and the rain felt like tiny needles against their skin. The metal housing had been torn from its moorings by the wind and was bent at a grotesque angle, exposing the delicate wiring to the deluge. Working in the chaos, they found a strange, unspoken rhythm. He would point, shouting instructions over the roar of the storm, and she would understand, bracing the housing with her shoulder while he reconnected the primary power conduit. Her hands, which she'd only seen holding whisks and spatulas, were steady and strong. Together, using a spare tarp and all their combined strength, they managed to secure the damaged housing against the shed wall, a temporary but vital fix. They stumbled back into the cottage, drenched, freezing, and utterly exhausted. The rope connecting them was the only thing that had kept them upright. Inside, Luna shed the oversized coat and immediately went to the small gas stove, her hands shaking slightly as she lit a burner. "Tea," she said, her back to him. "We need tea." As she busied herself with the kettle, Finn watched her. He had seen a different woman out there in the storm. Not the cheerful, slightly ditzy purveyor of purple pastries, but someone tough, capable, and fearless. He noticed, for the first time, how she kept glancing anxiously toward the window, her gaze fixed on the darkness where her little outdoor restaurant had been. She brought 2 steaming mugs to the table and sat down. The anger from earlier felt like a memory from another lifetime. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question surprised him as much as it did her. She looked up, her honey-colored eyes shimmering in the candlelight. She gave a weak, wobbly smile. "Just wondering if I'll have any tables left by morning, or a sign, or a dream." The last word was a whisper. Her bright facade finally crumbled, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. "I'm sorry about your birds. I truly am. I never wanted to ruin anything. I wanted to build something." He looked at her, at the genuine sorrow on her face, and felt a strange pang in his chest. It might have been guilt. He understood the fierce, desperate need to build something of your own. His research was his life. Her restaurant was hers. "The cottage has stood for 100 years, he said, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. "It was built to withstand storms like this. Your things will be all right." It was the closest he could get to an apology, to reassurance. She looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She took a sip of her tea. "Thank you, Finn." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the fury of the storm. The space between them was no longer filled with anger, but with the quiet hum of a truce, as fragile and as real as the candlelight flickering in the dark.
Chapter 4. The Aftermath of a Kiss. the world woke up to a profound, dripping silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind an island scrubbed clean and sparkling under a watery morning sun. Finn was the first to stir, his neck stiff from having fallen asleep in a hard-backed chair. Luna was still asleep, her head resting on her folded arms at the table, her face soft and unguarded in the dawn light. For a moment, he just watched her, this unexpected force of nature who had upended his quiet world. Quietly, he slipped out the door. The devastation was significant. His generator housing was still in place, a testament to their joint effort, but Luna's little pop-up restaurant was a wreck. 2 of her tables were gone, likely claimed by the sea. The others were overturned, and her beautiful hand-painted sign was snapped in 2. He felt the sharp, unfamiliar pang of something that felt suspiciously like empathy. He was surveying the damage when she emerged from the cottage, her expression falling as she took in the scene. "Oh," she whispered, her voice small. She walked over to the broken pieces of her sign, her shoulders slumping. Finn found himself walking toward her. "It's just wood," he said, the words gruff. "It can be fixed." She looked up at him, a watery smile on her lips. "You sound like you're offering to help, Mr. I don't like lavender." He felt a flush creep up his neck. "I know a bit about woodwork," he mumbled, deflecting. "The old keeper left tools in the Lighthouse workshop." They spent the morning working together, an easy, unspoken partnership forming in the wreckage. He repaired the broken sign with surprising skill, his large, capable hands carefully sanding and reinforcing the wood. She, in turn, salvaged her kitchen supplies, her mood lifting with every pot and pan she found unscathed. She brewed coffee, strong and black, just how he liked it, with no hint of lavender, and they drank it sitting on an overturned crate, looking out at the calm blue sea. "Why here?" he asked, finally voicing the question that had been bothering him. "Of all the places in the world to open a restaurant, why a remote bird-infested rock?" She laughed, a real warm sound that didn't feel intrusive this time. She told him about the puffins, about their lifelong monogamy, the way they returned to the exact same burrow year after year. She spoke of the terns, not with anger but with a scientist's passion, describing the sublime geometry of their flight. She listened, her honey-colored eyes fixed on him, seeing not a grumpy recluse, but a man deeply in love with his world. "You're not just a bird watcher, are you?" she said softly. "You're their guardian." Later that afternoon, as he was putting the final touches on the repaired sign, she came out of the cottage carrying 2 plates. On them were lumpy golden-brown scones. "I know you don't like scones, but these aren't lavender. They're sea salt and rosemary. A peace offering. Take 2. He hesitated, then took one. He bit into it. It was warm, savory, and surprisingly delicious. "It's good," he admitted, avoiding his gaze. "I know," she said smugly. They were standing close, the silence between them comfortable now, familiar. The late afternoon sun warmed their faces. He looked from the scone in his hand to her lips, which were curved in a triumphant little smile. He saw the freckles dusted across her nose. He smelled the faint, pleasant scent of rosemary and sea salt on her skin. And then, acting on an impulse he didn't understand and didn't want to question, he closed the small distance between them and kissed her. It was not a storm of a kiss, but something quieter, more tentative. It was salty and warm like the scones. For a moment she was still, surprised. Then she leaned into him, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. It was a kiss of truce, of apology, of a new and fragile understanding. When they broke apart, the air was electric. Her eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted. He felt like he had just jumped from the top of his lighthouse without a parachute. The silence that fell was more profound than any he had ever experienced on the island, because this time it was filled with a terrifying, exhilarating question. What now?
Chapter 5. A New Kind of Symphony. The days that followed the kiss were a strange and wonderful dream, a fragile bubble of time where the grumpy ornithologist and the sunshine chef found a way to exist not just side by side, but together. Finn found himself smiling more. He would leave his observations to help Luna reset her tables, his quiet presence a grounding force amidst her whirlwind of activity. She, in turn, learned to read his silences, bringing him coffee on the lighthouse steps without a word, understanding his need for space. She learned the names of the birds, gannet, guillemot, puffin. He, to his own astonishment, learned to appreciate the subtle difference between rosemary and thyme. Her customers, the few that braved the ferry now that the summer was waning, were charmed by the unlikely pair, the cheerful woman who ran the cafe and the tall, quiet man who would sometimes emerge from the lighthouse to point out a rare bird to them. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the island, they sat together on the lighthouse balcony. The repaired sign for the lighthouse in the Lavender was proudly displayed below. "The summer's almost over," Luna said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I'll have to pack up soon." The words landed in the quiet air like stones. Finn felt a familiar coldness seep into his chest. He had known this was temporary. Her world was one of people, of seasons, of bustling kitchens. His was one of solitude, of migratory patterns, of quiet observation. He had foolishly let himself forget that. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "That to the city, I suppose," she said, though there was no enthusiasm in her voice. "Try to get my old job back. Start saving up for the next dream." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken anxieties. The dream they had built together in their little bubble was about to pop. The incompatibility of their lives, the very thing that had caused their initial conflict, had returned. He couldn't leave his research, and she couldn't build her dream on a rock that was empty 9 months of the year. He looked down at her, at the way the last light of day caught in her hair. The thought of this place returning to its old silence, a silence now devoid of her laughter and the scent of her cooking, was no longer appealing. It was unbearable. His sanctuary would become a prison once more. "Don't go," he said, the words surprising him with their raw urgency. She lifted her head, her honey-colored eyes searching his. "Finn, I have to. I can't—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "But what if you didn't have to choose?" He stood up and led her down to his workshop, a place she had never seen. It was a large, dusty room at the base of the lighthouse, filled with woodworking tools, half-finished projects, and stacks of lumber. It was also, he now realized, ridiculously spacious. When the lighthouse was automated, the main keeper's residence was moved to the cottage, he explained, his mind racing, an idea taking shape with thrilling clarity. This whole ground floor was for storage and maintenance. It's been empty for 50 years. He gestured around the vast, high-ceilinged room. "There's a generator, water access, a fireplace." He turned to her, his eyes bright with a sudden brilliant hope. "It's big enough for a proper kitchen, Luna. A real one, with seating for winter. A place people would travel to, not just stumble upon. An all-season restaurant. A destination." She stared at him, then around the dusty room, her mouth slightly agape. She could see the gears turning in her mind, the dream she thought was ending suddenly expanding into something bigger, more permanent. "But your work, the noise, the people." "My work is to observe," he said, taking her hands in his. His voice was full of a conviction he had never felt before. But I've only been observing half the world. You taught me that there's more than just the flight of birds. There's the scent of lavender. There's the taste of a sea salt scone. There's the sound of your laughter." He smiled, a true, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. I think my symphony was missing a few instruments. I don't want the silence back, Luna. I want our noise." Tears welled in her eyes as a radiant smile broke across her face. "The lighthouse and the lavender," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It was always meant to be both of us." She threw her arms around his neck, and this time the kiss was not of truce, but of beginning. It was a promise made against the backdrop of the setting sun and the endless sea. The island of Aeridor had once been a sanctuary of solitude. Now, it was something far better. It was home.